Hello everyone. Today I warmly welcome you to the 9th video of our YouTube channel, and the topic of today's video is the absolute and the relative and their relationship. Well, I think this topic is the mostly misunderstood topic throughout the human history, and also the mostly misinterpreted topic in many religious forms. Well, when we say in absolute in the spiritual or the religious context, it essentially means the essence of the universe or the nature of the universal truth or the ultimate or the highest truth that all the enlightened masters had experienced. So if you are coming from an Abrahamic faith, then you could equate it to the concept of God. Or if you're coming from an atheistic religious tradition, you can relate it to, let's say, the ultimate truth or the universe, Mother Nature, or Dharmakaya. So likewise, you can give and you can come up with many different names, because the names and forms they operate or they are being actually used in the relative level or in much more lower level of the usage. But the absolute level, it's coming from the highest dimensions or the highest level of the universal hierarchy. And since our human minds do not have the capacity and the capability to perceive these higher dimensions, it's bound to be misinterpreted. You always have some human error in explaining or expressing this truth. I think this was the main reason for many enlightened masters in the past to be persecuted and to be punished by the society and also the religious faculties functioning at that time. So the question in our video and the thing that we are trying to understand is how to define this absolute and what's the real meaning of the absolute in religious and spiritual sense. And in this video I'm trying to explain these two terms, the absolute and relative, based on my own meditative experience and also based on the teachings that I received from our lineage, spiritual lineage. Well, now I think the best example we can give or present to the people to explain about the relation between the absolute and the relative is about this elephant that is being monitored or trying to be perceived by the 5 blind men. So these 5 blind men, they are like sitting around this elephant, and they are touching different parts of the body of the elephant. So one blind man is trying to figure out what the trunk is, but that man doesn't have any idea or has no knowledge of what he is touching, because he hasn't seen an elephant before. And a tail is being touched by another man, and another person, another blind man is trying to figure out what the leg is. So likewise, 5 different blind men trying to figure out the elephant by touching different parts of the body, and nobody has experience, or nobody cannot figure out what they are, because they didn't have any experience before of an elephant. They hadn't seen an elephant before. So each of this person can only explain in simple terms about what they can perceive to their limited sense. So the person who is touching the trunk, he can only explain about the nature of the trunk. And the person who is next to the tail, he can only say about the tail. So likewise, these 5 different blind men, in their own fashion, with the aid of their own information, with the aid of their own relative perceivability, they share 5 different stories. And the elephant is the absolute nature. The 5 different stories we hear are the relative stories to the absolute nature. But all these 5 stories are not complete, and they are bound to be misinterpreted, and they are bound to have this human error. But the next question is, how do we exactly get to know the absolute nature? So that is also one of the questions that we are asking in this video. So the only way to uncover the truth, the absolute truth, is to avoid this blindness, to find the cause behind this blindness, and then get rid of that. Well, if you are a truth seeker, if you are a spiritual seeker, it is quite important for you to open your third eye or your psychic centers, so that you can open yourself to higher dimensions. That's the only way one can reach and get to know about the God and the divine essence. So if the mind, the human mind, is involved in the relative experience, then the absolute can only be expressed as a state that is free of the human senses or the human mind. But can we attain, or can we reach out to that kind of state of consciousness, human consciousness, through meditation or any spiritual activity? Well, of course, yes. Now, let's take for an example, there's somebody, a person who's actually looking for peace and tranquility, and he is not aware of any kind of spiritual activities, and he also doesn't know how to do meditation. So the only thing that he can do at this very moment is to perhaps get himself soothed, or get himself, let's say, peaceful by taking some drugs or maybe some chemical substances, so that he can easily go into a mental state, a state that is free from all the mental activities, that is free from all the mental chatter and disturbances. Usually when people are getting like too high of using psychedelic, they claim to have witnessed the godly nature, right? I mean, we usually hear these type of stories. But the same thing can be experienced if you do meditation, and if you explore the higher dimension through your uh, inner guidance. So in meditation, when it comes to, let's say, in Buddhist studies, or maybe Hindu yogic studies, or maybe even in Abrahamic faiths, we talk about meditation, and we also talk about the possibility of attaining different higher consciousness levels. And in these consciousness levels, our typical gross mind, it ceases to exist, so that we can be free of our mental chatter, and therefore we can arrive to tranquility, peace, and harmony, even without taking any external substances. So these states that you get your mind, the states that are free from your mind activity, can be considered as um, states that have a sense of absolute nature. You could also say that these are the states that are close to the godly nature or the divine nature. So you can come up with many different names. And if you're pretty much familiar with, the Zen Buddhist tradition, so they have these peaceful and tranquil meditative states called satori and kenshos. You can also call them samadhis. And many of these mental states, the calm abiding states, can be achieved and can be arrived at by doing meditation or by activating certain chakras in your body. And for an example, a meditator who can be actually immersed in this satori or kensho state, usually they are experiencing the nature of mind during these meditative states as an expanded awareness, and some people claimed it as the godly nature, and some people claim it as um, merging into nothingness. So likewise, different people have different interpretations because of this relative nature of our mind. Now the thing is, like even for these tranquil meditative states where our human mind disappears, where there's no activity at all from our human consciousness, there are also levels to it. So depending on this, the level of our consciousness, depending on the level of the subtlety, we can arrive to, let's say, many different levels of the divine nature. But the question is, then at each level, what is happening? Because now at each level, human mind doesn't seem to exist. Then what is happening at each level? Like, the only way that I can explain about my meditative experience is that at each level, the dualistic nature of our mind is ceasing. The dualistic nature of our mind ceases to exist. So for an example, even for satoris and also the kenshos, or we can also call it clear light, there are many different levels. So at each level, a certain amount of duality of your personality, the certain amount of duality in your individuality, the certain amount of duality in your gross mind ceases to exist, and therefore this relative sense, the relative nature or the dualistic nature, level by level, is reducing. And at some point, you will go to the deepest level of consciousness, subtlest level of consciousness, which usually the ascended masters have the access to. And this subtlest level of consciousness is what we refer to as God, or the God consciousness in Abrahamic faiths, and Dharmakaya in Buddhist faiths, and Lord Shiva, perhaps in yogic faith. So if you look at this video, and I'm trying to explain the ascending order of these states, as you can see, so from the gross level of your mind, you have several different levels of samadhis, and through each level, your consciousness is getting subtle and subtle and subtle, and at some point, you also transcend this, the subtlest level, and then you will go to the highest energy state, or what we refer to as the highest state of consciousness, human consciousness, or the ascended master level. I think only at this ascended master level's mind or consciousness, one starts to see the real absolute nature. Because below this, the ascended master level, through all the, the meditative experiences, samadhis, what we usually encounter is a certain mental image. What we usually encounter are certain mental images that have this relative nature. So even if, let's say now you are deeply immersed in meditation, and in one of the meditative state, you notice, let's say, a figure of a divine figure, and you are saying, let's say, a demigod, or you might be even seeing, let's say, a local god, a god, figure of god, uh, who is like popular in your local area, in your country. Well, still in that figure you would see a certain amount of relativity. One would grasp it as it is. One would even uh, would not dare to worship that figure as a divine figure, but only a person who has reached the ascended master level would really see the absolute nature of this figure. And he would even notice that this divine figure has many different um, relative qualities, relative information that actually come from your, all the information that you have accumulated so far. So, likewise, depending on the level of your consciousness, the depending on the subtlety of your consciousness, and depending on the non-dualistic nature of your consciousness that you arrive at through meditation, you would see the absolute nature. You started to see the absolute nature in more fine-grained level. And then I will try to give a nice example to explain the relationship between this absolute nature and the relative nature. I don't know whether you guys, people who watch this video, believe in past lives. Well, as Buddhists and as Hindu yogic spiritual practitioners, people believe in reincarnation. But let's put this the belief aside. Let's assume that there was something, a significant event that actually took place in, let's say, in your home country, and there are about 5 or 10 meditation practitioners who are working together, who is aspiring for the highest truth in your group. And let's assume that all these 5 or 10 practitioners actually were living during this period, during that particular moment, during the time that this significant event actually took place. So then, if all of these practitioners have the capacity or the capability to recollect their past life memories, then they should be able to see what happened in that significant event, right? This significant event could be, let's say, a war, or let's say a massacre. So why do you think I give these type of examples? Well, these are the best examples or the most significant memories usually our consciousness captures throughout our lives. Let's forget about the past lives. Even in this life, if you encounter, let's say, something terrible happened to you, a chaotic and also very traumatic experience, that will remain and ingrained in your memory as a mental picture. And if you are a deep meditator, of course, you would notice these mental pictures, these mental images coming to your surface time to time. So these are the memories usually we refer to as the buried deeply buried and deeply ingrained memories in your unconscious layer of your mind. By the way, this information is not new to um, also the Western spirituality. I mean, this is not spoken only in Eastern spirituality, even in Western spirituality. The philosophers and people who like invested their time on exploring the consciousness, like Carl Jung, they have already spoken about the nature of consciousness, and even they have mentioned about um, the nature of the human psyche and the unconscious layer, the traits of unconscious layer. So coming back to our point, um, a significant event, a memory of significant event can very well be stored in your consciousness, in the deep layers of your consciousness. And when you do meditation and when you know how to tap into the past lives in your unconscious layer of your mind, you will come to experience and see these as mental images. So, as shown in this figure, if there are four people of four different relative experiences, four different paths, four different spiritual trajectories, they will still be able to recollect their past life memories of the same event. But as I mentioned, they will see four different stories. So, can you imagine why? It is mainly because of the relative nature of their mind. Now, we already mentioned that there are meditative states where you can experience the bliss, tranquility, and also the no mind experience. In those meditative states, the personality and individuality disappears to the nothingness, and in there, you are experiencing the absolute nature. Well, at least the absolute nature to a certain extent, because there are several levels to it. But when you move out from that nothingness, when you descend down from that, then you come to this the so-called jhanic or subtle meditative absorptions, where such past life memories are usually revealed to you as the natural process of your human evolution. So this is where you see different narratives or different relative stories. So this is a prime example to illustrate that our human minds actually work in relative fashion. There are absolute layers to that, there are absolute states to that, but in the intermediate states, our experiences are mostly relative, and they are based on our belief system and certain information that we gathered throughout many lifetimes and also in this single lifetime. Right. So up to this point, we have only discussed about the experience of the absolute and relative nature through our meditation or the consciousness of the meditative states that we can attain. But outside of us, also in the outside world, from the outside objects, we can also experience these two states. We can also differentiate these two states. For an example, when you are in a need of spiritual guidance, you would certainly go to, let's say, a spiritual guru. I myself have gone to many spiritual gurus, and well, I had direct guidance from them, and then my intuition also is working at the same time. So my intuition, what I feel from my intuition, is actually resonating with what my guru says. So my guru, the guru or the spiritual master that I meet at that particular moment, I consider him as a human manifestation or the human embodiment of this great universe. So this great universe or the absolute nature is manifesting through presenting itself through this spiritual master. And I am the one who is receiving the message. I'm the one who gets resonate with this message, and I am the relative object in that particular moment. So in that way, the interaction or the relationship between the master and the disciple can also be an example for the relationship between the absolute and the relative. Okay, let's take another viewpoint or an interpretation. So we have a nice figure in this video. Now you can see that this figure actually comes from a painting that you often find in European galleries. So this figure essentially interprets or expresses the nature of the universe, or the manifestation, or you could also say that this depicts the dawn of the universe. I just want you to take your attention to the topmost area of the figure. So you see a tree here. So this tree is usually referred to as the tree of life. And this tree of life is essentially, the tree that gives life energy, the tree that defines the enlightenment, or the lower levels of your chakras in your body, human body. So on top of this figure, you see a gold color circle, and this gold color circle essentially means the manifestability of the universe. And on top of that, you see a white color, a cloud shape, a shape which is similar to a cloud. And this white color cloud is usually what we refer to as the God consciousness. And the white color essentially represents the purity of the God consciousness. So anybody through any path, is if they are reaching the God consciousness, they will arrive to the ultimate purity of their mind and also the body and also in their energy system. So this God consciousness, has a neutral. It's neutral in a sense. The God consciousness essentially has a neutral state. Why? Because the cause and effects are not working at the level of God consciousness. And if you look at this figure, even this figure itself is self-explanatory. So the God consciousness in the topmost level, it represents the neutral level of the universe, but which also has the blueprint. And below that you have this golden color disc-like shape, which is the manifestability, or the state that manifests this entire creation. And the God consciousness alone cannot perform the manifestation. From the God consciousness, where you don't have any cause and effect principle working, you need to come to a lower level of consciousness, or lower state, lower energy state. So what I'm trying to explain is that if you go to this absolute nature or the God consciousness level, then the cause and effect principle is actually not working there. And it is because of this very reason that you won't have any relative experience in this meditative state. Now, we have different spiritual gurus or masters coming from different religious traditions. We have Jesus Christ, Prophet Muhammad coming from Abrahamic faith, and also we have Gautam Buddha coming from the Buddhist faith. Basically, they have two different opinions about the ultimate level of consciousness, but still, all these masters, when they are attuned to the highest level of their consciousness, they all claim that this state is essentially neutral. and the cause and effect principle is actually not working in that state. Or we could also say that state is non-karmic. So that is another way of interpreting the relative and the absolute states. The relative, in the relative states, the cause and effect principle is working, and our mind at relative level in a subtle form is functioning, or you still have the mind chatter. You have very subtle mental activities. Even if you go to a deep meditative absorption or a dhyana or jhana state, but at God consciousness level, or the deepest level according to Buddhist tradition, we call it Dharmakaya. At this level, the cause and effect principle is not working, and therefore there is no possibility at all for your mind to survive. So these are the ultimate purity levels that you can experience through meditation. All right. So in this way, in this video, we try to explain the relative and absolute nature in many different ways. And as a meditator and as a practitioner of a spiritual lineage, I tried my best to explain, about these two states. And then you are also welcome to share your opinion and add comments to these videos so that we can contribute to sharing our knowledge and also to lead other people in right spiritual direction. Thank you.